that all electronic devices are turned off or switched to silent mode. Members should send their speaking notes by email to hansardnotes@parliament.uk. We now begin line-by-line consideration of the bill. The selection list for today's sitting is available in the room and on the parliamentary website. This shows how the clauses, schedules and selected amendments have been grouped together for debate. A reminder that a member who has put their name to the lead amendment in a group is called first, or, in the case of a stand-part debate, the Minister will be called to speak first. Other members are then free to indicate that they wish to speak in the current debate by bobbing. At the end of a debate, on a call of amendments and new clauses and schedules, I shall call the member who moved the leaded amendment or new clause again. Before they sit down, they will need to indicate if they wish to withdraw the amendment or the new clause or to seek a decision. If any member wishes to press any other amendment, and this includes grouped new clauses and schedules in a group to a vote, they need to let me know. I hope that the explanation is helpful. It is to me at least. But we start with Amendment 13 to Clause 1. If any member wishes to make a declaration of interest, they can do it now. Okay, off we go. We begin our consideration with Amendment 13 to Clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider Clause 1 stand part. I call David Simmons to move Amendment 13.
Thank you. Good morning, David Schwanner. It's a pleasure, as always, to serve under your chairmanship in the Bill Committee today. We are bringing forward a number of amendments to this legislation, but I want to be clear from the outset, David Schwanner, that we're not proposing to push for a vote on those items. We're hoping to hear a response from the Minister, which in many cases will follow up on the evidence that we heard in the evidence hearings that took place as a committee yesterday. The purpose of this amendment is to introduce an element of discretion for billing authorities into the bill with regard to the application of the higher multiplier. The evidence that we heard yesterday and some of the written evidence that's come into the committee as well has highlighted the significance of a degree of local flexibility and discretion when it comes to the application of this, in order to ensure both that the billing authority, which is the local authority for the area, has flexibility so that where it may see some benefit to its local economy or to its residents in applying a different figure, they're able to do that. And that level of flexibility is something which has been reflected in the business rate system in operation in England since the 1990s. Clearly, as we heard yesterday in evidence, the overall impact of all of the measures in this bill broadly is considered by most sectors and by most of those witnesses to be moderate. And therefore the level of flexibility within the overall legislation still does not amount to a hugely different figure from any one particular type of business rate payer to another. However, there will be occasions, for example, when a local authority is keen to support a local business for the purposes of sustaining employment for a period of time, or because it provides an important local facility that they may see it is in the interest of local taxpayers to vary and have that flexibility when it comes to the application of that higher multiplier. So, that is the thinking behind the amendment. I move that amendment. We'll hear what the Minister has to say.
Thank you. Amendment 13 to Clause 1, as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Do I see any speakers? Do I call the Minister?
Chair, can I take your guidance on to take Amendment 13 with Clause 1 together?
Yes.
And speak to them at the same time, if that's okay. So Amendment 13 seeks to give local authorities discretion over where the higher multiplier enabled by this bill should apply. In England, there are currently two non-domestic rating multipliers. The non-domestic rating multiplier for properties with a rateable value of over £51,000 and the small business rate non-domestic multiplier for lower value properties. This bill will enable HM Treasury, through regulations, to introduce permanently lower multipliers for qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure properties, and to fund this by introducing higher multipliers for properties with a rateable value of £500,000 or more. Narrowing the scope of the higher multiplier would inevitably reduce the funding available to support the lower rates for qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure properties. Ratepayers in England may, however, be eligible for a range of different levels of relief from business rate relief. Some reliefs are mandatory and provided for in legislation, whereas others are given at the discretion of the billing authority. This bill will not affect the very wide powers local authorities have to award this discretionary rate relief as set out in section 47 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988. These powers already allow local authorities to devise and deliver their own relief schemes without the intervention of central government, where the authority is satisfied that this would be in the interest of its council taxpayers. Once this bill has come into force, local authorities will be able to use their discretionary powers to provide relief, should they choose to offset the impact of the new higher multiplier, and I hope that that gives assurance to members to be able to withdraw the amendment, that local authorities will still have the powers that they've always had, with the flexibility to respond to local concern. If I may move on to the next section, which is Clause 1. Clause 1 adds into the business rate system new additional multipliers or tax rates. Currently there are two multipliers, as I set out before, the non-domestic rating multiplier and the small business non-domestic rating multiplier. The legislation for these is found in Part A1 of Schedule 7 to the Local Government Finance Act 1988. Clause 1 adds a new Chapter 3A to Part A1 for the new additional multipliers. As was set out by my honourable friend, the Exchequer Secretary, at the second reading of the bill last month, the introduction of the new additional multipliers that this clause enables is the government's first steps towards creating a fairer business rate system. The intention of these new multipliers is firstly, once set at autumn budget 2025, to provide a permanent tax cut to qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure businesses, ending the uncertainty of annual retail, hospitality and leisure relief, and secondly, to ensure that the tax cut is funded sustainably through the introduction of higher multipliers levied on the most valuable properties. The new Chapter 3A gives the Treasury powers to set these new additional multipliers. I understand the concerns of honourable members that we are providing for the new taxation through powers in a bill, but we face a challenge in business rates in setting the multipliers because demand notices are issued by individual local authorities, and these must be ready to go out several weeks before the start of the financial year. We must confirm and give notice of the multipliers to local authorities before they prepare these demand notices, and that simply does not allow time for us to return to Parliament with a bill each time we want to change the multipliers. In recognition of honourable members' concerns about providing new taxation through powers in the bill, Clause 1 includes some important safeguards over the use of these powers. Firstly, paragraph A6A1A of the new Chapter 3A ensures that the Treasury cannot set a multiplier which is more than 0.1 higher than the domestic rating multiplier. We often, in practice, refer to the multipliers as being so many pounds in the pence. For example, the current non-domestic rating multiplier is 54.6 pence in the pound. In those terms, this clause ensures that the multiplier cannot be more than 10 pence higher than the non-domestic rating multiplier. Secondly, paragraph A6A1B of the new Chapter 3A ensures that in a similar way, the Treasury cannot set the lower multipliers more than 0.2 or 20 pence in the pound below the small business rate non-domestic rating multiplier. Thirdly, Clause 1.5 ensures that where the Treasury are using these powers to set a higher multiplier, they will need to bring forward a statutory instrument before the House of Commons in draft for approval before the multiplier can be confirmed. To be clear, these values are the maximum parameters at which the new additional multipliers may be set. They do not represent the changes that the government intends to implement. The parameters are guardrails that offer sensible limits with proportionate flexibility. The decision on the level at which these new multipliers will be set will be taken at the autumn budget 2025, factoring in the impacts of the 2026 revaluation on the tax base, as well as a broader economic and fiscal context. This clause also ensures in the new paragraph A6A2A that the Treasury cannot set more than 2 lower multipliers. This reflects our intention to have 2 multipliers for retail, hospitality and leisure, one for properties below £51,000 rateable value, and one for properties between £51,000 and less than £500,000. However, the new paragraph A6A2B does ensure that we may still make adjustments to these two new multipliers if the hereditament is unoccupied at the central rating list. Although our current intention is for the same multipliers to apply across all occupied, unoccupied and central list properties. Finally, Clause 1.4 ensures that the existing arrangements in Chapter 4 of Part 1A of Schedule 7, which concern the making and giving of notices of the multipliers, will also apply to the new multipliers. This, for example, will ensure that we must give notice of the new multipliers as soon as reasonably practical after they have been calculated and they have been rounded to 3 decimal places. Thank you.
Do I see anybody else who'd like to speak? No? David Simmons.
Dame Siobhan, I know the Minister and I had the joy of parallel careers in local government for many years. I can't imagine he spent a great deal of time looking forward to the opportunity of explaining non-domestic business rate multipliers in a bill committee. However, as he acknowledges, it is important to ensure that there is a sufficient degree of local scrutiny and flexibility so that those local authorities that are billing authorities are able to exercise their discretion in order to support their local economy. And I'm grateful to the Minister for outlining the government's intentions in that respect. That being the case, Dame Siobhan, I request leave to withdraw that amendment.
Thank you. Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn? Amendment by leave withdrawn. Clause 1 has already been debated. The question is that Clause 1 stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the question that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Clause 2 concerns additional multipliers in special authorities. The meaning of a special authority is already defined in section 1446 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988 as one which on the 1st of April 1986 had a population of less than 10,000 and a total rateable value per population number of more than £10,000. The City of London Corporation is the only authority that meets this test. The City of London has powers to set their own non-domestic rating multipliers. For example, for the current year, the non-domestic rating multiplier in the City of London is 56.4 pence, compared to the same multiplier for the rest of England at 54.6 pence. Those existing powers are in Part 2 of Schedule 7 of the 1988 Act. Clause 2 inserts a new paragraph, 9b, into Part 2 of Schedule 7, giving the Treasury the powers to make provision for additional multipliers in the City of London. Treasury may only do this where they have exercised those equivalent powers in Clause 1 for the rest of England. The unique powers of the City of London reflect its special circumstances, notably the very small resident population. This clause reflects the government's intention for the new multipliers to apply across England. In Clause 2, we have replicated the same safeguards for setting the additional multipliers as applied in Clause 1. So the new subparagraph 9BA I1 will ensure the higher multipliers in the City of London cannot be more than 0.1 or 10 pence in the pound higher than the city's non-domestic rating multiplier, and the new paragraph 9BB12 will ensure the lower multipliers in the City of London cannot be more than 0.2 or 20 pence in the pound lower than the city's small business rate non-domestic rating multiplier. The Treasury intends to use these powers to require the corporation to set higher and lower multipliers in the city at the same level of the supplement or discount as they have adopted for the rest of England. This is obviously important for the higher multipliers given the amount of high-value properties in the City of London. As with Clause 1, the new paragraph 9b(3) will ensure that where the Treasurer are using these powers to set higher multipliers in the City of London, they will need to bring statutory instrument to the House of Commons in draft for approval before the multiplier can be confirmed. Thank you.
Anybody wish to speak? David Sims.
Very briefly, Dame Siobhan, I have no objection to this. I'd just be grateful if the Minister could confirm, perhaps afterwards in writing if it's more convenient, that there has been a degree of consultation with the corporation in order to establish what, if any, impact they expect this would have on their budget.
Minister?
Yeah, I can confirm in writing the exact consultation that's taken place, but certainly conversations will take place, and we do need to return to that if we don't take these measures and to include the City of London in that, there will be many high-value properties that we can use to support retail, hospitality and leisure in the rest of England that we will not be able to take these measures on. So it's an important measure, but I'll certainly confirm in writing through officials the consultation that has taken place.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. We now come to Amendment 14 to Clause 3, with which it will be convenient to consider Amendments 15 to 25. I call David Simmons.
Dame Siobhan, thank you very much indeed. So these amendments largely revolve around the first three numbered, 14, 17 and 20, and consequent amendments in relation to the language that then is reflected in further paragraphs where those amendments become relevant. And the aim is to address an issue which has been raised both extensively in the public evidence sessions, written evidence submitted to the committee and the wider debate about the measures in this bill, in respect of particular circumstances where there are types of businesses, for example, those that are unusual in that they are open for very long hours because they may be the only retailer in a particular location and therefore of particular significance to that community. Where they are a host to a post office, again, we all hear examples of local post offices co-located with shops where we're very keen to ensure that those businesses are sustainable for the wide benefit of that community and access, in particular for vulnerable residents, to those services. And given the progress that's been made in developing banking hubs, often in premises that are co-located, sometimes with post offices, which I've already mentioned, that we know that that's been important in ensuring access to cash for communities that might otherwise lose that, access to banking services in general, both for small business and for vulnerable residents, and that these types of business can be absolutely critical, especially in rural locations, but also sometimes in parts of our suburban areas where particularly elderly residents may struggle to access those types of shops and services if we do not ensure that they are continued to be supported. So the purpose of each of these amendments is to introduce specific exemptions or provisions to ensure that in the way that these measures are enacted, those points around long opening hours that might otherwise not be available, access to a post office or access to a banking hub continues to be supported. So I move the amendments for the purposes of debate. Thank you all.
Amendment 14 to Clause 3 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Do I see anybody who'd like to contribute to the debate? Can I call the Minister?
Thank you, Chair. In addressing the Amendment 14 to 25 from the Shadow Minister, which concern excluding certain properties from the higher multiplier, these amendments would see properties that are open to customers for more than 18 hours a day, properties that are shared with a post office and properties that are shared with a banking hub excluded from the higher multiplier. These are very important sectors. The post office deliver essential services that are hugely valuable to both individuals and SME businesses in urban and rural areas across the country. These include mail, parcels, cash, basic banking, utility bill payments, and government services, as well as other public services. This is why post offices are eligible for the existing retail, hospitality and leisure relief, which gives eligible relief for hospitality and leisure properties, 40% relief on their business rates, up to a cash value of £110,000 per person in the 2025-26 financial year. With regards to banking hubs, the government understands the importance of face-to-face banking to communities and high streets, and we are committed to champion sufficient access across the country as a priority. This is why the government is working closely with banks to roll out 350 banking hubs across the UK. The UK banking sector has committed to deliver these hubs by the end of the Parliament. Over 90 banking hubs are already open to the public. The government continue to work closely with high street banks to ensure communities and local businesses have access to services they need. And to provide certainty and permanent support for the retail sector and the high street, through this bill we are introducing permanently lower tax rates for retail, hospitality and leisure properties with a rateable value under £500,000. The existing RHL relief has been repeatedly extended year on year as a temporary stopgap, creating cliff edges for businesses and significant financial pressures. The government is currently developing with the sector the definition of qualifying RHL properties, which will be introduced through secondary legislation in 2025. The sector definitions will broadly follow those already defined in the current retail, hospitality and leisure relief system. But to ensure that this tax cut is sustainably funded, we also intend to introduce a higher tax rate on the most valuable properties, those with a rateable value of more than £500,000. To be clear, this only applies to the highest value properties and less than 1% of all non-domestic properties across England. I understand the Honourable Member wants to exclude some properties from this higher charge. However, the government wants to take a fair approach, which is why we intend on asking all properties with a rateable value of £500,000 and above to contribute more to support the high street. Applying this sector approach in the fairest possible way and ensuring the government does not intend on excluding any properties with a higher value for that reason. Added to which, there are practical implications that make it difficult to apply different multipliers to retailers based on their opening hours. Local authorities require certainty about which multiplier will be applied to which property ahead of the billing year. This cannot be determined based on opening hours, which businesses can quite rightly change at their own discretion, subject to legal requirements. And so for the reasons set out, we cannot accept the Honourable Member's amendments, which would seek to carve out certain premises from the higher tax rate. But I hope the committee is reassured about the government's commitment to post offices, to banking hubs and to the retail sector.
Would anybody like to contribute to the debate? Can I call David Sinnott?
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. I'm grateful to the Minister for talking us through what is, as we know, a very complex set of reliefs that are available. I know this is an issue which particularly colleagues who represent rural areas have been concerned about, as there are often sites, for example, that have multi-use, that they are a petrol station and a post office or a banking hub, a small supermarket. So they are potentially larger premises, but they are critical to the operation of that local community. I'm grateful the Minister has set out how those existing operations, how those existing reliefs may operate. So for those reasons, Dame Siobhan, I'm happy to withdraw these amendments with the Legal Committee.
Thank you. Is everyone content for the amendments to be withdrawn? Amendments by Lee withdrawn. We now come to Amendment 1 to Clause 3, with which it will be convenient to consider Amendments 2 to 6. In the absence of Vicky Slade, I call Martin Wrigley.
Thank you, Chair. We put forward this amendment to look at the possibility of introducing or including businesses which are manufacturing. We know that manufacturing is important, we know it is struggling, and we feel that by the addition of this area, we might be able to help them in the same way as we are intending here to help hospitality, retail and leisure. It is a vital area, and an area that we have lost too much of in the past how many years, and this relief will be a small help to them to recover, which is why we would like to add the category of manufacturing.
Amendment 1 to clause 3, as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Shall I call the Minister?
Thank you, Chair. I will now address Amendments 1 to 6 from the Honourable Member from Mid Dorset and North Poole, which concern eligibility for new lower multipliers. These amendments would see qualifying manufacturing premises be eligible for the 2 new lower multipliers, which this bill aims to introduce only for qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure properties from 26-27. Let me start by highlighting that the government does recognise the importance of the manufacturing of the manufacturing sector. This government has identified advanced manufacturing as one of our 8 growth driving sectors as part of its industrial strategy, recognising the contribution it makes to our economy. However, the provisions in this bill are about delivering our manifesto pledge to protect the high street. To that end, we aim to introduce permanent low tax rates for retail, hospitality and leisure properties from 26-27. To ensure that this tax cut is sustainably funded, we also intend, as I've outlined before, to introduce a higher rate for the most valuable properties, those with rateable values of more than £500,000 and above. And as I did say before, this represents just 1% of the ratings system, so the context is important. These measures, enabled by this bill, will provide certainty and support those RHL businesses which make up the backbone of the high street. The existing RHL relief has been repeatedly extended year on year as a temporary stopgap gap, and as we said before, it has created a cliff edge for businesses, and that clarity and that certainty has been demanded repeatedly from those sectors. We have been clear that the new eligibility for the lower RHL multipliers will broadly follow those already defined in the current retail, hospitality and leisure relief system that's currently in place. At the second reading of this bill, the Honourable Member for Mid Dorset and North Poole spoke about her experience of owning a cafe and the need for government support for such businesses. That is precisely why we're enabling the introduction of these new multipliers for those type of properties through this bill. The Honourable Member's amendment would expand the scope of this bill to support to include manufacturing properties. However, that does not match our intended goal of supporting the high street in a very targeted way through the measures and the scope of this bill. And against the current fiscal backdrop, extending eligibility to other sectors may dilute the support that the government can offer them to retail, hospitality and leisure properties, or even require an even higher rate on properties with rateable values of more than £500 or more in order to fund the new lower multiplier sustainably. I want to reiterate the government is committed to supporting the manufacturing sector. At the autumn budget, the government announced £975 million for the aerospace sector over 5 years, over £2 billion for the automotive sector over the same period, and £520 million for a new life science innovative manufacturing fund. For these reasons, we cannot accept the Honourable Member's amendment, but I hope the committee are assured of the government's continued commitment to the manufacturing sector.
Martin Wrigley?
Thank you, Chair. I am a little reassured by the government's attentions to support the manufacturing industry, and will look forward to their efforts to do so and more. Certainly reassured by the support for the high street, which is very important to all. I am happy to withdraw the amendment.
Does anybody else wish to?
Is everyone content for the amendments to be withdrawn?
Aye.
Amendments by leave withdrawn. We now come to the question that Clause 3 stand part of the bill, with which it will be convenient to debate Amendment 10 to Clause 6, new Clause 2 and new Clause 4. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. If for this section I speak to Clause 3 and then return after other contributions to Amendment 10, new Clause 2 and new Clause 4. We have previously discussed Clause 1 of this bill, which allows the Treasury to introduce new additional multipliers. Clause 3 is concerned with how we will determine which properties those multipliers should apply to. The clause is split into three main parts concerning occupied herediments, which is in Clause 3.2, unoccupied, which is in Clause 3.3, and herediments in the central list, which is Clause 3.4. Properties on the central list are typically utility networks spanning many local authority areas, such as the gas, electricity and water networks. Each of these parts of Clause 3 are essentially identical, and so to save the committee from much repetition, I explain the provisions on occupied herediments in Clause 3.2 only. The most important part of Clause 3.2 is a small amendment made by Clause 3.2a to existing powers in the Local Government Finance Act 1988. Under those existing powers, the Treasury already has the ability to determine in regulations which multiplier applies to which property. Those powers in respect of occupied properties are in paragraph 10.9 and 10.10 of Schedule 42A of the 1988 Act. Clause 3.2a amends that part of the 1988 Act to extend those powers to cover all the additional multipliers. This means that the Treasury will be able to determine by regulations which properties pay on which multiplier. As with Clause 1, we've included in Clause 3 safeguards as to how the Treasury may use these powers. Firstly, Clause 3.2b amends paragraph 10 of Schedule... actually, Chair, may I just correct the record? I think I might have referred to Schedule 42A. It's actually 4ZA for the record. So firstly, Clause 3.2b amends paragraph 10 of Schedule 4ZA to ensure that the new subparagraph 9bb that the Treasury cannot apply the higher multipliers to any hereditament with a rateable value of less than £500,000. This will ensure, based on the current rating list, that 99% of hereditaments are unaffected by the higher multiplier. Secondly, the new paragraph 9bc will ensure that the Treasury, when setting new lower multipliers, can apply them to only qualifying retail, hospitality and leisure hereditaments. The precise meaning of qualifying RHL will be set out in regulations, but we have been clear that we intend to broadly follow the existing definition which applies for the current relief scheme for those sectors. And thirdly, the Treasury, when using the existing powers to determine who pays on which multiplier, will need to bring that statutory instrument to both Houses of Parliament in draft for approval before they can be confirmed. This requirement is not on the face of this bill because the powers already exist, but if honourable members wish to be assured on this point, it can be found in section 1437B of the Local Government Finance Act 1988. The power in the new subparagraph 9c to define qualifying RHL properties follows the negative resolution procedure, given that this power only allows us to reduce rates for certain ratepayers. Finally, on Clause 3, the existing powers for determining the application of the multiplier allows the Treasury to do that by reference to a list of factors found in subparagraph 1010 of Schedule 4ZA to the 1988 Act. This is a non-exhaustive list that includes factors such as its rateable value, its location or its use. For the introduction of the lower multipliers in 2026, we intend to replicate the process and the broad eligibility in the current RHL relief. As with the current system, local authorities will determine eligibility, but rather than against guidance, we will lay down criteria in regulation. Clause 3.2c gives Treasury the scope and also to also determine the application of multipliers by reference to that description which the VAO will put on the rating list. As I've said, the remaining parts of Clause 3 make the same provisions which I've described, only in relation to unoccupied properties and those on the central rating list. It is unusual for powers to apply multipliers across occupied, unoccupied and central rating list for properties to align.
David Simmons?
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. If I may, I move the amendments that stand in my name for debate, and new clause 2 and new clause 4, if I'm at the correct point, to move those. These are designed to address a concern which again was raised in evidence which there was some debate about yesterday, and that was the objective both of assessing as far as we can in advance the impact that these measures would have on the affected businesses, and then providing for a review and scrutiny process to follow up, to confirm that that assessment had been correct or otherwise, and see what lessons can be learned from that. And I appreciate the government is very keen to press ahead with this, and therefore will be reluctant to accept amendments that have that effect. But nonetheless, I'm sure all members will recognise that when making decisions, it is important as far as possible to have a sense of what the impact is likely to be. In particular, knowing that the impact of some of these things will affect those businesses which may be marginal. And we know in many communities the loss of a large supermarket, a large warehouse, a logistics centre, which may be affected, for example, can have a major impact both on the availability of service and on local employment. So that is the thinking behind bringing each of these items forward. With your leave, Dame Siobhan, I will move them for debate.
We will come to whether you wish to withdraw those amendments later. Yeah. The question is that clause 3, as amended, stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the question that clause 4 stand part, with which it will be convenient to debate new clause 1. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm that these are amendments 10, new clause 2 and new clause 4 being discussed now? If we move to clause 4.
Yeah. What? Yeah, we said we now come to the question that clause 4 stand part, with which it will be convenient to debate new clause 1. Yeah. If you wish to speak to the amendments, it should have been in the debate previous.
Ah, okay. I thought I was going to come back at the end of that section, but it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I may, on a point of order, Dame Siobhan,
Yes.
I just confirm, having moved those amendments, I did indicate that subsequent to the debate I would be minded to withdraw them. I've moved them, but I'm not aware that we've made a decision on whether they be withdrawn.
Yeah. Yeah. I have. It has been suggested that the decisions on those amendments come later, and there's no further point to debate them. Is that okay?
If I may then, Dame Siobhan, with the leave of the committee, I'll withdraw those amendments at this point.
Is the committee agreeing to? Okay.
Can I might have this one more, which was quite usual. Can I just show that is 10, new clause 2 and new clause 4.
We are now on clause 4 stand part, with which it will be convenient to debate new clause 1.
If I speak to new clause 1 first. New clause 1 would require the Secretary of State to review and report on the impact of the introduction of new multipliers. Let me first set out that I understand full well why the Honourable Member has been pressing this point, and I agree with the point in principle. Can I just check that I'm on the right section here? Because I'm not
It is incredibly
convinced
complex.
that I've jumped ahead.
Yeah, we're having a combined debate on clause 4 stand part,
Yeah.
and then on new clause 1.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. With that, Chair, I'll just speak to clause 4, and can I check then I'm able to come back and speak to the second point later, or shall I do them both now?
Do them both now.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll take that. Okay. Clause 4 makes two small consequential amendments to the existing legislation to reflect the addition of new multipliers. There are other amendments we will need to make to regulations to reflect the changes in the bill, but we will do that using existing powers once the bill has passed. We have not taken any further powers to make consequential changes. And if I move on to new clause 1 at this point. As honourable members will be in no doubt already, the bill provides the basis for how the two new retail multipliers and the higher multiplier will be set. In doing so, we are deliberately constraining the maximum levels of the new tax rate by reference to the existing business rate multipliers. These guardrails prescribed in legislation provide that the basis for how the new rates will be set at the next budget. For the two retail, hospitality and leisure multipliers, the bill ensures that the rate may not be more than 20 pence in the pound lower than the small business rate multiplier. For the higher multiplier, it cannot be more than 10 pence above the standard multiplier. I have outlined how the new multipliers will be set in the next budget, but I trust that honourable members will also be reassured that when the new multipliers are set, the Treasury intends to publish analysis of the effects of the new multiplier arrangements, taking into account the effects of other changes in the 2026 budget. And so the impact assessment that has been referred to both today's and that we also heard yesterday in the evidence session will certainly be picked up later on in the process. But of course, that work will not stop the next revaluation. As with all taxes, the government will keep the policy and its effect under review. It is therefore not necessary to impose this requirement in legislation. With this explanation of the bill's provisions, the process for setting the tax rates and HMT's intention to provide the analysis of the effects of the new multiplier arrangements, I hope I provided the necessary assurances to allow the honourable member to withdraw the amendment tabled.
Anybody? Martin Wheatley?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. May I speak to new clause 1, which is our proposal? I thank the Minister for his words. I mean, this is, as we are discovering, an incredibly complex and one might say arcane way of creating taxes. And it does have impact on many high street businesses. Whilst the Treasury analysis will tell us how the multipliers have hit and the numbers that are done from a taxation point of view, it doesn't answer the fundamental question of whether this is actually having impact on the high street. It doesn't answer whether this is actually achieving what the bill is setting out to do, which is to provide the necessary relief. The clause that we are asking to be considered here is looking more at the impact on the businesses and whether that economy is actually done, whether the provisions have had a measurable impact on economic growth. That isn't the same as an analysis from the Treasury of the changes in the bills that are being presented to people. It is looking at the effect and the impact to see whether this is achieving the desired outcome. That is why we'd like to see the measurement in here. As an engineer and a scientist, I always believe in a feedback mechanism, something that measures what has been achieved from what has been required. This, we believe, was missing in the bill, and this is what we'd like to see, which is why we've asked new clause 1 to be considered. The work is there, the work will be beneficial to one and all. I don't see it as a significant barrier to this bill progressing, but I do see it as a positive feedback mechanism that will actually enable us to determine the effectiveness of this support on the desired areas and businesses, including high streets that are so important. Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like?
Okay. The question is that clause 4 stand part of the bill. As many are of the opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Amendment 26 proposed to clause 5. I call David Simmons to move Amendment 26.
Thank you, David Siobhan. This is moving on to a different area of the measures in the bill, and in particular this amendment is designed to address the concerns raised in evidence and by many across the House in the debate around the impact on children with special educational needs and disability. It's important to note that we recognise the government has introduced some steps in these measures to address some of those concerns, but we also need to recognise that when we consider the history of SEND, there have been many changes to that system over the years, and in particular the provision around wholly or mainly providing education to those children who are in receipt of an education and healthcare plan specifically addresses those at the most significant end of special education needs and disabilities. Now, the last Labour government introduced a system in the days of statementing, which included measures called School Action and School Action Plus. So a child who had a form of special educational needs that was not sufficiently severe that they required the statementing process, but where there were additional resources required to support them in the classroom and additional resources triggered to the school by that classification. And that was then morphed in the 2014 reforms into SEN support. So beneath the education and healthcare plan for the most significant levels of need, there is a setup around SEN support whereby local authorities direct an additional level of funding towards schools because of children being classified in those levels. And one of the concerns that we have is that in the independent sector means that there will be some children who have found their way to an independent school because, for example, it has a reputation of providing a good level of support to children with SEN, but who have not been through a process whereby they have been formally categorised. And I think of a school like Gisher in my constituency, which is an independent special education needs and disability school that charges fees. A proportion of its students are there through the choice of their parents, not been through any local authority process. Others are there because they have an educational healthcare plan and it is the named school paid for by the local authority. But within that group there are a significantly large number of children. All children attending that school have some form of special educational need or disability and are therefore attending a private school. And therefore I think the rationale behind this is to ensure that we do not find ourselves in a situation where independent schools that provide education to large numbers of children with SEND but below the education and healthcare plan threshold are put in a very difficult financial position where potentially the government would not otherwise intend to go down that route. And I think most of us will be aware that the extent of SEND provision in the independent sector is very large. Indeed, it is a major concern to local authorities, the amount of money they're having to pay in fees to place very significant numbers of children in sometimes very, very specialist provision. But beneath that, we will also be hearing from many constituents who've identified that a moderate level of special educational needs may be met in the independent sector without the child having gone through the process of an education and healthcare plan. So by seeking to ensure that schools that are educating children in a broader sense of special educational needs, we're seeking to ensure that that is not missed. So for those reasons, David Siobhan, I move the amendment for debate. I'm sure the Minister will have some further comments to make further to what he said in the evidence sessions yesterday.
Amendment 26 proposed to clause 5 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Call the Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Amendment 26 would result in the exemption of fee-paying schools from the measure if that fee-paying school, wholly or mainly, caters to pupils with special educational needs, whether or not those pupils also have an education, health and care plan, an EHCP, as defined under Section 20 of the Children and Families Act 2014. The Government is aware of the concerns raised with respect to pupils with special educational needs in private schools that may lose their charitable relief because the school is not wholly or mainly composed of pupils with EHCPs. The Government has carefully considered its approach to ensure that the impact on pupils with the most acute needs is minimised. The Bill provides that schools that are charities that are wholly or mainly in the provision of education for pupils with an EHCP plan remain eligible for charitable rates relief. In business rates, wholly or mainly generally means more than 50%. In practice, the Government believes that this will ensure that most special schools will not be affected by this measure. We expect any special schools losing charitable rates relief to be the exception, potentially even in the single figures. Private schools that benefit from the existing rates exemption for properties that are wholly used for the training or welfare of disabled people will continue to do so. Most children with EHCPs already have their needs met within mainstream state-funded schools. If an EHCP assessment concludes that a child can only be supported in a private school, the local authority funds that child's place. As such, any changes to fees as a result of this measure will not impact on parents or the families of those pupils. In private schools, including private special schools, just 5.7% of pupils have an EHCP. Predominantly in private special schools, 97% of pupils with an EHCP in private schools already have their place funded by a local authority. Where an EHCP has not named a private school as part of its assessment of the child or the parent or the carers, they may choose to place that child in a private school. This is a choice made by the parent and does not detract from the assessment of the pupil's needs that can be catered for within mainstream state-funded schools. While there may be some instances where a child's parent disagrees with the local authority's assessment that their child's needs can be met in the state sector, the EHCP system is the most appropriate channel for resolving such disagreements. Amending the basis on which fee-paying schools are able to retain charitable rates relief in the manner in which this amendment proposes would undermine the government's intention to remove tax breaks for private schools in order to raise funds to support more than 90% of pupils who attend state schools. The approach chosen in the bill is targeted to ensure that the impact on pupils with the most acute needs is limited. This is ensured by deeming that schools that wholly or mainly cater for pupils with EHCPs are exempt from this measure. As the committee will know, the majority of children in England who have special educational needs, with or without an EHCP, already have their needs catered for in the state-funded sector. The government works to support local authorities to ensure that every local area has sufficient places for all children of compulsory school age that need them, and works to provide additional appropriate support with pupils with SEN requirements at a state-funded school.
David Simmons.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. I'm grateful to the Minister for acknowledging, in particular, the point that the vast majority of children in this context will have their needs provided for in the state sector. That's something I think we're all very much aware of and generally would consider something we can be proud of. But I think we do remain concerned on this site that there are a significant number of children who find their way into the independent sector as an alternative to parents pursuing the process of statementing or seeking SEN support with an attached budget. And clearly we are concerned that there is both a risk that a significant proportion of those children will find themselves displaced by a range of measures that the government have taken into the state sector, which is not especially well geared up to cope with their needs at the moment. But in particular, that the restriction of the relief solely to those who have an educational healthcare plan is restricting it solely to those at the most significant end, and therefore there will be a large number of children who are at risk of losing out. But Dame Shaw, I recognise that the government has the numbers on this matter, and therefore I withdraw the amendment.
Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn? Aye. Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to Amendment 7, proposed to Clause 5. I call David Simmons to move Amendment 7.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. This is, in essence, on a related subject to that which we've already debated, so I won't go into it at great length. But one of the things that we are very aware of is that the independent sector is particularly critical in special education needs and disability, and that its coverage across the UK is quite variable, especially for those children who may have a very significant special need that cannot easily be addressed in a wide range of SEND provision. And by introducing an element of discretion, so that a local authority that may be the host to a school that may be very small, may provide a very, very small number of children, by way of an example, is able to exercise its discretion in that respect. We know that there are already a very large number of different types of charities that are service providers and that charge fees to people for the provision of those services, and that can include anything from adoption placement, provide fostering and safeguarding in the children's sector, through to a large variety of charities that charge for the provision of services such as home care, care for adults with disabilities. And the point was made yesterday in evidence that there is some degree of risk of creating a two-tier charity sector where a school that provides for children with a significant level of need on a chargeable basis is not considered a charity for the purpose of business rates relief, whereas if that was providing for a fee residential care for an adult with a learning disability, it would be eligible for relief. And that remains a concern on this side of the House in terms of making sure that we sustain the network, in particular of that very complex end-of-need provision that we currently have in the UK. So for that reason, I move the amendment for debate. I look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say.
Amendment 7 proposed to clause 5 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Amendment 7 seeks to preserve the discretion of local authorities to award relief, in this case to private schools. Currently, any charity that is using its property wholly or mainly for charitable purposes is entitled to a mandatory 80% relief. This means the local authority must award that 80% relief when the conditions are met. This bill will remove that entitlement to mandatory 80% relief for private schools. However, the bill will not disturb the existing and very wide powers local authorities have to award discretionary rate relief above and beyond that. They are found in section 47 of the Local Government Finance Act 1988. Those powers already allow local authorities to, for example, top up mandatory 80% charity relief with a further 20% discretionary relief. So once this bill has come into force, local authorities will still be able to use section 47 to grant discretionary relief to private schools if they wish to do so. They'll be able to grant relief of 80% or any other level of relief they consider to be appropriate. Now that is a matter for local discretion and for local authorities to decide themselves. And hope with that assurance that that will still be in place, the honourable members are content to withdraw the amendment.
David Siobhan. Well, I'm pleased to hear the Minister once again championing the value of local discretion in decision making, which I think we mutually acknowledge is incredibly important. I'm aware that it remains a degree of concern, particularly within the SEND sector and especially for residential special schools, about the way that this will play out, and in particular the fact that local authorities may be faced with something of a Hobson's choice between being expected to raise a certain amount of revenue by applying the maximum possible business rates take to an individual setting versus doing what they need to do to support the needs and interests of children in their particular community, and indeed support schools that sometimes may be the only centre nationally that are able to provide for very special needs. However, again, I recognise that the government has the numbers on this, so with the leave of the committee, I will withdraw them.
Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn? Aye. Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to Amendment 8, proposed to Clause 5. I call David Simmons to move Amendment 8.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. We heard in the debate in the Chamber representations from a number of members in respect of access to faith schools, but they are not the only ones that may have a special character. There are a number of types of education and special characters, such as particular sporting opportunities. There are organisations like Montessori that provide a particular method of education which parents may wish to exercise their discretion to access for their children. And the objective of this amendment is to ensure that we're the only school that has that special character or religious character in a given location is an independent school, that it should not be the subject of the measures in this bill in order to support the access for mums and dads and for children who need to access those particular schools of special character across the country. And it specifically relates to existing legislation in respect of the distance to travel to school. We know there are already regulations that are designed to ensure that, both in the interests of health and environment and community, that children will access sustainable transport by walking, by cycling, by using public transport where possible. But we are very conscious that in many parts of the country, there is limited access, in particular, to certain types of faith school, and there is limited access to certain types of school of special character. And clearly, it therefore would inhibit parental choice if those schools were not able to be accessed, if that is the only way for those families to access the type of education that they wish to access. So whilst a small measure, and we recognise that the impact of this relief, as the Minister set out yesterday, is not always going to be significant, for an individual school, particularly one that may charge fees that could be lower than the prevailing funding rate for local authority schools, as is common in particular with Muslim faith schools in a number of cities across the UK, it seems to be a particularly significant imposition that they be asked to pay what could for many be a significant hike in business rates at a time when we recognise none of them are for-profit institutions, but they may be financially marginal, and this may be something that drives that provision out of existence, where mums and dads in a given area really want and need to access it. So that is the purpose of this amendment. Dame Siobhan, I move it for the purpose of debate.
Amendment 8 proposed to clause 5 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. Call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Amendment 8 would require a private faith school maintains its eligibility for charitable relief if there is no maintained or academy school of the same faith within the statutory walking distance as set out in the Education Act 1996. This amendment would also provide that schools with a currently undefined special character exempted from the bill measure when defined in regulations. The government values parental choice and recognises that some parents want their children to be educated in schools with particular faiths. However, all children of compulsory school age are entitled to a state-funded school place if they need it. State education is suitable for children of all faiths. All schools are required to follow the Equality Act, which includes fostering and promoting an environment that encourages respect and tolerance of children and families of all faiths and of none. We have already made provision to ensure that private schools, wholly or mainly concerned with providing full-time education to pupils with an education, health and care plan, remain eligible for business rate relief. The government is not considering any further exemptions to this policy, and there is therefore no need, as the amendment makes, to give the Secretary of State the power to establish and define new designations of school character in order to exempt them from this measure in the future. The government has listened carefully to arguments on this matter and has decided to carve out for faith schools or similar schools cannot be justified. It is the government's position that state-funded education is suitable for all children of compulsory school age, and for that reason we are unable to accept the amendment proposed.
David Simmons.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. I need to be clear, I'm not here to act as an advocate for faith education. I'm not personally a fan of it, but I recognise the Minister's point. But I think we need to acknowledge that there are many colleagues across the Chamber, and there are many constituents that we all have, who do believe very strongly that they should access a school of a particular character. And there will also be children who, in the state sector, may be able to access, for example, a specialist sports academy with particular facilities that are able to develop and nurture their talent. But in some parts of the country, that may not be available. It may be that an independent school is the only one able to foster and nurture that talent. And we would not wish to see any measures taken that would deprive anybody of that opportunity. But once again, Dame Siobhan, I recognise the government has the numbers on this, and therefore, with the leave of the committee, I'll withdraw the amendment.
Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn?
Aye.
Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to Amendment 9, proposed to clause 5. I call David Simmons to move Amendment 9.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan. The question of hereditaments, certainly not one that I ever remember in English classes when I was at school. However, it is quite a significant one in the context of business rates, in that the way in which business rates legislation operates is it designates a given property. Clearly makes it easier to tax because property is very hard to move or to disguise the ownership or possession of. But in respect of schools where, for example, there is a nursery on site as part of the overall premises considered to be the hereditament for the purposes of business rates legislation, we are concerned on this side that it creates a situation where a premises that would be exempt from business rates or eligible for relief, it were physically separate from the school to which it is connected. But because it is on the same site, it is not eligible for that relief. And we know that the government is very keen, as we were in government, to see an expansion of access to high quality childcare. A very large proportion of that is in the private sector, and indeed the government, commendably in my view, has set out a policy of expecting maintained state schools that have nurseries on site to significantly increase the childcare offer in order to support local parents, which is a very good thing. But we are also clearly aware that in many locations there may be a nursery connected to a private school, which is used by parents using tax-free childcare, measures provided for in legislation specifically to support all parents, but primarily, especially lower income parents, to access that provision. But where business rates applying would simply load an extra cost onto premises because of the fact that it is in effect co-located as part of a single hereditament. So the purpose of this amendment is to separate those out so that where there are premises that are on a site that becomes subject to business rates as a result of these measures, but which would not otherwise, because of its purpose, use and location, be subject to those business rates, that they may be considered as two separate institutions, so we do not apply measures to those institutions that in fact we are seeking through other parts of legislation to support and encourage. I move the amendment for the purposes of debate.
Amendment 9 proposed to clause 5 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for his amendment on this matter. It may assist the committee if I briefly explain how the bill will apply to nurseries and nursery classes within the settings of private schools. The bill will ensure that nursery schools, where they have their own hereditament and therefore their own rates bill, they will be excluded from the provisions, and where there are charities, they will retain their charitable rate relief. That is the effect of the new subparagraph 4A3 at line 23 of page 5 within clause 5. A nursery school is likely to have its own hereditament and therefore its own rates bill when it is run and occupied by a separate body to the private school. An example would be where a separate charity to the private school runs the nursery. A nursery school may also have its own hereditament if it has its own dedicated building site that is located away from the rest of the school. However, where the same charity runs a private school with some nursery provision and does so from the same site, then it's very likely to have one hereditament and therefore one rates bill. I do want to make it clear that private schools which include some nursery classes in the way I've described will still be considered as a private school and they will lose their rates entirely. The government has decided where private schools that mainly provide education for pupils of compulsory school age also have nursery classes within the school, the presence of a minority of nursery age children should not remove the whole school from the business rate measure. This approach best ensures consistency with the underlying policy intent. And so, for that reason, we are unable to accept the Honourable Member's amendment. And it would not be appropriate to attempt, as the amendment does, to create new artificial hereditaments for nursery classes at private schools, merely to preserve some of the charity relief for that private school. But I hope the committee will recognise the steps that we have taken to protect nurseries with their own hereditaments, and of course, it will continue to be the case that nurseries run and occupied by separate charities with their own hereditaments will continue to receive the relief. Thank you.
David Simmons.
David Siobhan, I mean, again, once again, I recognise the government has the numbers on this to do as they wish, but I'm concerned by what the Minister has outlined. In particular, this is not simply an amendment that is about nursery schools, which are a specific thing. It is about nurseries, which provide childcare. We know that for younger children, we have the early years foundation stage, which is not compulsory, but is provided and followed by the vast majority of childcare settings. that aims to ensure a level of educational progression that can be measured from the very youngest children to those who are ready to start school. And that is something which is provided in a different way from what is done by nursery schools, of which there are several hundred in the country, and which are quite specific institutions. It is certainly in constituencies in London, like the one which I represent, quite common to find that there are nursery providers that are on locations and run as part of private school institutions, but which are not accessed by parents who would have any intention of their child going on to be part of that private school. But because the fees that are charged are in line with the local childcare market, and because those fees are significantly supported by measures like tax-free childcare, they are an affordable means of securing good quality childcare, and those children then will go on to a range of local provision. And I remain concerned that by insisting that if that is located on premises which are also the providers of a private school that is within the scope of these measures, that they will be subject to a significantly higher rates bill than were they located on a physically separate building just down the road. And therefore, I do remain concerned about that. But that will remain, I suspect, an issue of contention during the passage of this bill. And clearly, whilst there won't be an impact assessment and a review specifically proposed in the legislation, there will be the opportunity to see the impact that it has in due course. So, for those reasons, Dame Siobhan, I'm prepared to withdraw this amendment at this point with the leave of the committee.
Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn? Aye. Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to the question that Clause 5, as amended, stand part of the bill.
I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Clause 5 removes charitable rate relief from private schools. Under the current law, all charities are entitled to 80% charitable relief on any properties they occupy and use wholly or mainly for charitable purposes. That rule is found in paragraph 2 of Schedule 4ZA to the Local Government Finance Act 1988. Clause 5.2 therefore amends paragraph 2 to exclude private schools from that rule. The new subparagraph 3 removes from charitable relief hereditaments wholly or mainly used for the purpose of carrying out on a private school. This will ensure that ancillary and support buildings used as offices will also lose their relief as well. For example, the classrooms and sports fields where they are wholly or mainly used for the purposes of a private school. The policy to remove the eligibility of private schools that are charities for charitable rate relief is a tough but necessary decision that will secure additional funding to help deliver the government's commitments to education and to young people.
Will the Minister weigh?
Happy to give up.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Dame Siobhan. Yesterday we heard plenty of evidence from lots of witnesses, specifically about private schools too. And we also heard from Professor Francis Green, who stated that this would have a negligible impact on private schools, while at the same time as the Minister's already stated, will raise much needed funds to support the policies that we promised in the build-up to the general election. So does the Minister agree that while this is a tough choice, the impact on private schools of this bill is relatively negligible, and therefore it is a necessary measure to raise the funds we need to deliver our policies?
I think that's an important point, really, which is, there is political intent behind this in order to deliver on the manifesto commitment. And I think at a time when, let's be honest, trust in politics is tested, delivering on a manifesto that presented during an election is very important. More than that, the vast majority of young people attend state schools. And in every community across the country, over the last decade certainly, all of us have seen the impact of a reduction in support and many schools struggling. And I do think that is featured in the demand in some cases, even for private schools, where parents with children, maybe with SEND or with other conditions, who don't believe that is being met within the state sector, feel they have no other choice but to look to the private sector. And what we are absolutely determined to do is to rebuild the state sector so that every parent can have confidence that for those children who do need additional support, that they will get that support in the mainstream setting. I'll also say that quite a lot has been made about the impact on pupils and the viability of schools. And we've published the full impact assessment that we have made on this, from regions to the type of schools, to the different types of faith schools, to a number of other measures. And what that demonstrates is that even if, and we don't believe this will be the case in many cases, but even if every school was to pass on the entirety of the financial implications of the scope of this bill to each pupil, it would only amount to just over £300 a year and less than £1 a day. It's hard to believe in that context that this will have the type of impact that is being suggested. But when taken together, the money that will raise when reinvested back into the state sector is part of that transformation programme that we know is much needed. Now, this government is committed to eliminating barriers to opportunity, and it's right that the government concentrates on the broader picture towards the state education sector, where over 90% of children are educated. The rest of the clause, 5.2, is concerned with the definition of a private school. For the majority of cases, we think it will be quite clear what is a private school. As the bill says, that the new subparagraph 4a, which clause 5.2 will insert, for full-time compulsory school age education, a private school is one where fees or other considerations are payable. For clarity, a fee or other consideration for education may include gifts, bequests, and other referrals of value that are made in exchange for the education of a particular pupil or pupils. As set out in the explanatory notes published alongside the bill, this does not include block grant funding. So, for example, academies funded through the Department for Education, so they are not caught by these provisions. The new subparagraph 4A3 ensures that nursery schools, where they have their own herediments and therefore their own rates bill, will also be excluded from the provisions, and where they are charities, they will retain their charitable rate relief. Although I do want to make clear that private schools that include some nursery classes will still be considered as private schools, and they will lose their relief entirely. The new subparagraph 4b deals with post-16 education but under 19 education, where a fee or other consideration is payable, such as private sixth form schools. It follows a similar path to the provisions for compulsory school age institutions, except that it has to navigate the fact that some state sixth forms and colleges of further education may charge fees for some pupils, such as international students. Therefore, the new subparagraphs 4b2 and 3 ensure that such institutions only lose their relief if the provision of education to post-16 under 19 pupils is wholly or mainly in respect of which fees or other considerations are payable. As a result, private sixth forms will lose their relief, but colleges of further education, where only a few pupils may be fee paying, will be unaffected by these measures. We have also excluded from the provisions at the new subparagraph 4b4 and subparagraph 6 independent training or learning providers. These institutions providing state-funded education to post-16 under 19 pupils in a similar way to colleges of further education. However, because of the particular way they are funded by the Department for Education, we are concerned that they may otherwise be caught in the bill. We have therefore made it clear that these are outside the meaning of a private school, and they will retain their charitable relief. The new paragraph 5, subparagraph 5, then provides a general exclusion for any institution if it is wholly or mainly concerned with providing full-time education to pupils with an education, health and care plan. It is rightly of interest to the House, and this was discussed at second reading. As was explained by my honourable member at second reading, the test for wholly or mainly in the business rates setting generally means 50% or more. As a result of this general exclusion, the government expects that most private schools will be unaffected by the measure, and as such will therefore retain eligibility for business rate charitable relief. To add, The existing general exemption in business rates for properties that are wholly concerned with training or welfare of disabled persons will be unaffected by the bill and will continue to apply. As such, any private schools falling under that exemption will continue to be fully exempt from business rating. There may be a small number of special schools that will still lose relief, but we expect this to be very low. At second reading, the Honourable Member for Hinckley and Bosworth asked how many private schools may still be affected by measures in the bill, and it was explained in the impact note that was published alongside the bill that the government does not systematically hold data about who occupies businesses, and that data is instead held by individual local authorities. The government has instead used data provided by the Department for Education and sought, where possible, to match that data on the existing business rate list. Given this, it's not possible to say with certainty precisely how many special schools will be impacted, but as I say, we expect most will not be affected. In fact, we expect that any special schools losing charity relief to be the exception, potentially, as I said earlier on, in single figures. Finally, Clause 5.3 concerns unoccupied properties. Charities are the owners of unoccupied properties and they may benefit from 100% relief, where they can show that when next in use, the property will be wholly or mainly used for charitable purposes. In relation to private schools, we think it's unlikely to happen, but an exception might be where a private school has some facilities on a separate site which are currently vacant, but the school has plans to bring them into use. Therefore, Clause 5.3 ensures that private schools are not able to claim charitable relief on unoccupied properties in situations such as those described.
David Simmons.
Thank you, James Siobhan. Clearly, the government has set out its direction of travel and is determined to proceed with it. I think it is important to acknowledge, in particular, given the rationale around diverting funds into the state sector, of course, that our state schools, by all significant measures, are the highest performing now that they have ever been. And whilst I'll be the last to claim that everything in the state sector is perfect, and we know that there are significant issues that need to be addressed, as there always are, that there's been enormous progress in both educational outcomes for children in our state schools in the last decade or so, and the opportunities of those young people, reflected, for example, in the fact that youth unemployment is half today what it was in 2010. And I do suspect there will be a degree of disappointment amongst many state school heads who've heard that there's this tidal wave of money coming in their direction, to acknowledge that even if all of the funds raised by the changes to business rates, VAT, etc., were to be diverted, it is less than 1/3 of the cost of a single classroom teacher. But of course, we've already seen announcements that that money will also be funding a wide range of other activities. Now, James Siobhan, clearly the purpose to which government seeks to put those funds is outside the scope of the bill. But I think there are many that will look at this and will recognise that the significant harm that it does to a part of our education sector is simply not justified by the benefit to anybody else. And for that reason, we will, I'm sure, be opposing the matter when it finally comes before the House. However, again, I recognise that the government has numbers, and I will leave it to them to proceed.
The question is that Clause 5, as amended, stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Or the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the question that Clause 6, as amended, stand part of the bill. Oh, sorry, excuse me. Do you want me to do that? Do you want me to do that? Amendment 10 to Clause 6 was debated with Clause 3 stand part.
Amendment withdrawn with leave of the committee.
And similarly... Oh, I see, yeah. Sorry, I went too many pages over. obviously optimistic about reaching the end.
I've done that a few times.
We now come to Amendment 11 to Clause 6, with which it will be convenient to debate Amendment 12. Clause 6 stand part and new Clause 3. I call David Simmons to move.
Well, thank you, Dame Siobhan. I will be brief because we discussed this matter, which touched on certainly the evidence sessions yesterday, and they are all amendments that seek to ensure both a review mechanism and impact assessments for the measures that are contained within the bill. The Minister said earlier on that he was minded to proceed in essence regardless of the outcome of that, but there will be an opportunity, no doubt, for Parliament to return to scrutinise those impacts in due course. So I move those items for debate. It's my attention, subject to the Minister's response, to withdraw them.
Amendment 11 to Clause 6, as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Clause 6 provides for when the provisions in the bill will commence. The provisions in clauses 1 to 4 provide for the new additional multipliers to have effect from the 1st of April 2026. As honourable members will have heard, the Chancellor will set out the new multipliers at budget in autumn 25, and those multipliers will then take effect from the 1st of April 2026. Clause 5, removing child support rate relief from private schools, will then take effect from the 1st of April 2025. As my honourable friend and the honourable members will be aware, this government is determined to fulfil the aspiration of every parent to get the best possible education for their child, and it's right that in pursuing that aim, we focus on more than 90% of school-age children that attend state schools. The outcome of this clause will raise approximately £140 million per year by 29/30. Taken together with a policy to apply VAT on private school fees, the government will raise around £1.8 billion by 2029/30, and that will help to deliver our commitment to education and to young people. My department will be working with local government ahead of the 1st of April 25 to explain the provisions of the bill so that they may be able to identify those private schools who should not receive relief. As we've shown in the impact note published alongside our bill, we expect around 1,000 private schools to be affected by these measures across England, and so we are confident the relief can be removed by the 1st of April 2025. Thank you.
Call David Simmons.
Dame Siobhan, I'm sure most mums and dads will be very glad that that excellent education is already available in England's schools, given the transformation that's taken place in standards. But again, it is the finances that we're here to concentrate on, and for those reasons I will withdraw the amendments and new clauses that stand in my name with the leave of the committee.
Is everyone content for the amendments to be withdrawn?
Aye.
Amendment by leave withdrawn. Amendment. We now come to the question that Clause 6, as amended, stand part of the bill. I call the Minister. Do you want to make a... You don't want to make a contribution?
I think I've just done that.
Yeah, okay. And nobody else does? Right. The question is that Clause 6, as amended, stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the question that Clause 7 stand part. I call the Minister.
Thank you, Chair. Clause 7 merely states the short title of the bill.
Do I see anybody else want to make a contribution? The question is that Clause 7 stand part of the bill. As many are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to new Clause 1, which has already been debated. Martin Wrigley to move formally.
So moved.
The question is that new clause...
Review of impact on business, high streets and economic growth.
Do I
now the question.
Oh, sorry. I removed the clerk's position in saying that. I apologise. The question is that new clause 1 be read a second time. As many are of the opinion, say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. No. I think the noes have it, the noes have it. We now come to new clause 2, which has already been debated. You've already withdrawn it, so do we leave? Yeah, okay. New clause 4 has already been debated, but it's withdrawn. We now come to new clause 5. I call David Sims.
Thank you very much, Dame Siobhan. You'll be relieved to hear the last of the amendments and new clauses that I will be moving for debate. The purpose of this is to bring in a measure to support the local retention of additional receipts that come from these measures. We know that we've been on a journey with local government finance over many years to ensure a greater degree of local retention of business rate proceeds, something which has been supported cross-party. That's been introduced for a variety of reasons, partly to encourage local authorities to promote growth in their local business community by growing their business rate base and retaining a greater share of the proceeds. But in respect of this specific bill, the aim is to ensure that the additional revenue that is derived from these measures is retained by the billing authority rather than going to another pool elsewhere. And the rationale for that is manifold. In respect of the additional proceeds that may come from private schools that are subject to these measures, we know that local authorities, particularly given the timing of the introduction of this legislation, may find it challenging to ensure that there is a place available for any child who is displaced from the independent sector into the state sector, particularly so if that child has significant special educational needs or disabilities. And therefore ensuring that those resources are retained locally will give some additional element of resource for local authorities in seeking to meet the challenge. And we know that a particular dynamic of that is that often those areas where the private schools are most full are also the areas where the state schools are most full. So whilst there is overall a declining population of children in our state schools in England as a whole, and I know my own constituency and local boroughs are particular examples of that, where they've seen a very large drop, significant vacancy rate, that is not the case at all phases of education or in all year groups. And therefore there is a significant challenge for those parents already who are having to seek an alternative place for their child, where the retention of the resource locally would give some additional support. And further, in respect of the additional revenue that may be raised from a variety of different types of businesses, the retention of that support locally would then enable the local authority to use that money to support its local economy, to invest in measures to support employment, for example, to support the development of new businesses. That would be in line with the agenda that's been set out by the government. They wish to see growth as a major priority. And it would also create a direct link between the local decisions of the billing authority and the financial outcomes that would follow. So for all those reasons, Dame Siobhan, I move this new clause 5 for debate.
Local retention of additional receipts.
The question is that news clause 5 be read a second time. I call the Minister.
Thank you to the member for this. As we've explained, as a result of the introduction of additional multiples from 26-27, local authorities collect additional business rates income. New clause 5 would allow them to keep that income in its entirety. The amendment would do so by requiring the government to alter the percentage share of business rates to be retained by local government and the share to be sent to central government. In practice, of course, any additional income from the new multipliers introduced by clauses 1 to 4 will vary from local authority to local authority and change from year to year. And those local authorities with fewer large properties may well collect less income as a result of the new multipliers and therefore be worse off as a result of this amendment. Furthermore, accurate data on this will not be available until some time after the end of the year, whereas the central and local percentage shares need to set out before the start of the year. And so in practice, we do not think it would effectively achieve the honourable member's intended outcome which the amendment sets out. Instead, the government will work to ensure, as far as practically possible, that local government income from business rates is unaffected by the introduction of new multipliers. This will be a much fairer and stable outcome for local government than suggested by the amendment. More generally, the government has already announced its commitment to reform the way in which local government is funded to return the sector to a sustainable position. This includes the already announced reset to the business rate retention system, as intended when the previous government established the system. We will use the reset to restore the balance between aligning funding with need and rewarding business rate growth, and we will work in partnership with local government to ensure that the new government finance system, local government finance system takes into account the impact of new multipliers on the business rates collected by local government. I hope I have given the committee some assurances about how local government income will be protected from the changes in this bill, and in light of this, I hope the member is able to withdraw the amendment.
David Simmons.
James Shaw, I know the Minister is a localist at heart and will generally be supportive of measures that increase the autonomy and decision making at local level, but I recognise again that the government has the numbers to reject this. I have to say, the Minister, I do think the point that it's hard to model the outcome was addressed by previous amendments which the government chose not to accept, about undertaking both an impact assessment forward-looking, which would enable us to understand better what the impact of some of these measures would be. However, given the Minister's observations and the numbers in committee, Siobhan, with leave of the committee, I'll withdraw new clause 5.
Is everyone content for the new clause to be withdrawn? New clause by leave withdrawn. The final question I must put is that I do report the bill to the House. And I understand at this point you've all got to be nice to one another. Does anyone want to be nice to anybody, or just all need to get on with it?
Oh, to say some words? Yeah, I thought you meant more generally in the way that we conduct.
You can be as general or specific as you like.
I was going to go on an errand to Tesco to buy some mince pies. I think this has been a very useful process. I think the time that has been given by both opposition parties in preparation of the amendments has helped really scrutinise the bill. I think it has helped the government in terms of ensuring that the bill does what it is intended and safeguards to make sure that the bill doesn't do anything that is unintended. We set out our position on the bill, and that's been very clear. And the spirit in which the opposition benches have approached the amendments and withdrawing them and not taking them to the vote, and the constructive way that we've exchanged today, I think is to the credit of the committee. Thank you.
James Shaw, as always, a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And in that Christmas spirit, of course, I would like to thank the Minister for his constructive engagement, something which I know has been characteristic of a number of the ministers in his department, which has been obviously helpful. I'd also like to put on the record my thanks to the whips. I appreciate when this was scheduled, it could have taken up a very great deal of time for what is a relatively short piece of legislation. And I think we have recognised the point very impactfully made yesterday, that overall the impact of the measures in this specific bill is limited and moderate, and therefore we sought to approach it in the light of that. Now, we may have a fairly significant disagreement with the government about the intent of which this particular bill is a part in the way that it approaches both local government funding and the situation with independent schooling, but nonetheless, so we have to recognise that the numbers are there. So I'd like to say today thank you very much to the Minister and his colleagues for the way in which they've addressed the matter.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank everybody. It's my first bill committee experience. It has been interesting and delightfully short, and I'm delighted to see it executed so effectively and efficiently. I'd like to thank the Minister for all of his thoughtful and thorough explanations of the different bits and pieces, and I really hope that this will provide good support to the high streets, which desperately need that surety of their situation going forward. So I'd like to thank everybody involved, and I'd like to thank the clerks particularly for their help in explaining to me how this process was going to be working and to help us through this. Thank you very much indeed.
I think niceness is complete. The question is that I do report the bill to the House. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.